Hi, I'm Tony. I'm an author, presenter at Sky Sports, and years ago I went to the jungle and got ill. Very ill. So this is my podcast adventure to find more energy. It's packed with biohacking, science, health tech, supplements, and some of the most well-known experts on the planet.
This is something I spent 4 months of my life doing with electrodes glued to my head so that you can do a lifetime worth of meditation.
Decide what you don't give a fuck about, which is something you don't care about.
Some of it gets quite out there.
I had some stem cells sent up to my house that I had stored, and then I injected myself with mannitol.
And we even hack hangovers.
Alcohol is poisonous. So is water and oxygen in the wrong dosage.
So that's my podcast, Zestology. Live life with energy, vitality, and motivation. The average 4-year-old laughs as many as 300 times per day. The average 40-year-old, by comparison, laughs 300 times every 2.5 months. Depressing? Yes. Coincidence? Almost certainly not. Today on Zestology, 2020 has not been funny, but humour can get you through anything. Why humour is a superpower in work and in life. I'm Tony Wrighton, down by the Thames in West London, recording this podcast. And Naomi Bagdonas is that rare thing, a highly qualified academic and also a comic. And when I say rare thing, I don't know any other highly qualified academics who are also comics, but Naomi is that. And she, along with Jennifer Aaker, has written Humour seriously, and it's just come out in the UK. It's coming out in the US very shortly. It's to help all of us, however long we've been lurking at the bottom of our own humour cliffs, to bring laughter and levity into every aspect of our lives. And what is fascinating, and the reason I've got this book on order, is that their research has shown that laughing helps us to be better humans. It's absolutely simple, and there's research and studies and science to prove it. And when you hear kind of ideas like the fact that a 4-year-old laughs more in a day than a 40-year-old does in a couple of months, it's almost a bit depressing, isn't it? It makes me want to laugh more. I think I've changed a little bit since interviewing Naomi. I loved this interview, and I think you will as well. And I started by asking Naomi an important question. How do you describe what you do?
I work really hard at helping people unlock more joy in their lives, both at work and at home.
Yeah. And what does it actually say on your CV? Because you're an academic, aren't you? And a comedian?
My CV. Yes, indeed.
Yeah.
So I've worked much of my life at the intersection of corporate strategy and comedy. So my background is actually designing and facilitating sessions for groups of executives. So think Fortune 100 offsites with boards or executive teams, very focused on sort of innovation strategy, group psychology, unlocking sort of how do you unlock breakthroughs in groups of people. And so that's sort of one side of my background. And then on the other side, I have spent 10 years doing improv comedy on nights and weekends. So moved to LA for a number of years, going back and forth between San Francisco and LA, and just deeply love comedy and improv in particular. And this sort of double life that I was leading, where I was doing corporate strategy by day, doing improv by night, came to a head when I realized I was leading a pretty incongruent life and feeling really drained and close to burnout. And so I've always been sort of a behavioral science nerd on the side as well. And so when I went to business school at Stanford, I decided to dig into the science here and figure out actually, what is this power that I really deeply believe that there is in humor and in laughter, and how do we harness that to make our workplaces less sterile, less inhuman, and really cultivate more empathy and more energy with our colleagues at work.
Wow. Okay, yeah, I've long been. I mean, one of the reasons I've been excited to speak to you is that I've long been fascinated by almost, I suppose, the science of comedy. and I went to the Edinburgh Festival for probably 15 years in a row. And sometimes I would go and watch the same comedian on 2 nights and fascinated at the bits that you thought were improvisation. And actually, it wasn't improvisation. It was kind of planned improvisation, if you see what I mean. There's a real science to it. And then also fascinated by how some comedians simply have an intangible authority over the room, which means they can get their message across so much easier. And then the next comedian will come on 10 minutes later and doesn't have that same authority. There is a science to all that, isn't there?
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, there's a science. It's interesting. We're talking about 2 sciences here. One is really the brain science of what happens when we laugh. And that's what makes humor so incredibly powerful. And the other side is when, we interviewed hundreds of comedians, and of course, this is a world that I've lived in for a while. And, there is a science as well as an art to comedy, that there is actually structure to what we find funny. For example, truth and misdirection are 2 core tenets of humor. You laugh not because something, catches you off guard and it's something you can't relate to, but actually we laugh because we think, oh, I've seen that, or I've done that, or I know people who do that. And then second is misdirection. And this is really, you've probably heard of setup and punchline, which is the most fundamental joke structure, really basic. Most comedians will sort of scoff at the mention of setup and punchline because it's so basic, but it is baked into all comedy, which is the idea that in order to land a joke, in order to have something be funny, you have to build suspense, you have to build misdirection. And so oftentimes what I find with the executives that I work with is they have these great ideas that could absolutely be funny, but they're actually they are giving away the punchline too early, or they're not building enough suspense or misdirection or contrast. And so part of what I do in my coaching work, and this is with executives that I work with either, in preparation for being on SNL or on the Today Show, is we just mine their life for truths, right? So an executive will come to me and say, hey, I'm giving a talk. I want to be funny. What should I say? And I turn it back to them and I say, actually, just tell me what's true. What's going on with you? Tony, you mentioned picking up your kids, right? Oh, yes. Great. Tell me about your kids. Well, that must be, what is it like quarantining with your kids right now? What is the last thing that one of your kids said that was so off the wall that you were just like, how are you a human? And so it's just really mining our lives for things like that, and then putting some structure using some really easy techniques.
Right. Great. Yeah. Well, perhaps, let's dig into it a bit more then. And I suppose I'm especially interested in asking about humor in terms of well-being, because this podcast is around energy and vitality. And I wonder if there's a link between humor and well-being.
Oh, I'm so glad you asked that. Yes, indeed there is an incredible link. So first, and I'll say in this context that we're living in right now with the shift to remote work and everything else that's going on in our world, many of us have never felt more disconnected from our colleagues, from our loved ones. And with that comes increased rates of depression, of loneliness. And so this is a really hard time for us as a society for many reasons. And while humor may seem really frivolous in that context, right? We've got a global pandemic, we've got systemic racism, a climate crisis. We've all got to remember to shower at least once a week. It's in these sort of moments where gravity and disconnection are greatest that levity can actually be most powerful, that this is when we need humor the most. And there are a few aspects of well-being that I think are really powerful here. First is humor and laughter's impact on community and on our sense of connection.
Right.
So when we laugh with someone, we connect in a really powerful way. Neurochemically, laughing together, there's just nothing like laughter. Actually, in some ways, it's very similar to a runner's high. So I will say there's one thing like laughter, and that's sort of a runner's high. Yeah. But it really gives you more bang for your buck when it comes to interpersonal connection than just about anything else. And this is in part because when we laugh, our brains release the hormone oxytocin. And so when you and I are laughing together, we may be, hundreds of thousands of miles apart, but our brains are firing with the same hormones at the same time, telling us to trust each other, telling us that this is a safe relationship, that this is a positive relationship, and that maintains whether we're in a room together or whether we're across the world. And so, why this is powerful, not just in that moment when we laugh together, but particularly relevant for couples who are quarantining and having challenges with their partnerships right now, is when we recall moments of shared laughter, we become more satisfied in our relationships. So there was one study, one of my favorite studies, where researchers had two groups of couples reminisce about moments from their relationships. So in the first group, they had partners reminisce about positive moments. So Tony, tell me about just a positive moment that you two have shared. And they had them, tell stories about those positive moments. In the other group, they had people reminisce about moments of shared laughter. So tell me about a time that you really laughed together. And by the way, they had other controlled groups like a negative time and neutral time, that sort of thing. But these are the groups that we really care about. And what researchers found was that the group who had reminisced about moments of shared laughter later reported being 23% more satisfied in their relationship than the other group, than the group who had just reminisced about positive moments.
Wow.
And so these moments of shared laughter, not only do they impact us neurochemically in the moment, but they bolster our sense of community and our relationships over time.
Yeah.
And so that's one aspect.
By the way, I bet that lots of people were doing exactly what I was doing then and reminiscing over a moment of shared laughter and feeling really good about it.
Great.
I'm sure lots of people listening were doing exactly the same thing then.
Oh my gosh. So everyone listening, pause this podcast and call someone who you love and say, I know that this is totally weird and quirky, but this woman who teaches about courses about humor and well-being at Stanford told me to do this. Let's talk about that time that we really laughed together doing X. And literally spend 2 minutes on the phone recalling a moment of shared laughter with someone that you love. It's wild how powerful this is.
That's so great. This podcast is brought to you by Mass Zymes. If there's one thing you should be worried about not getting enough of, it is enzymes, the workhorses of digestion. And here's the problem. Nearly everybody lacks digestive enzymes, and that is often why we suffer from digestive issues like bloating, indigestion, and gas. And if you know one thing about listening to Zestology, you know that I'm all about getting digestion right. When you get the gut right, everything else falls into place. In some ways, you are not what you eat. You're what you digest. We lose enzymes as we age. So if we don't have strong enough enzymes and enough enzymes in our gut, we might only be absorbing 40% of the foods we are eating. What a waste. And if you take digestive enzymes, a lot of them are cheap and ineffective, and a lot of them don't have enough protease for digesting healthy, high-protein diets and healthy, high-protein foods. So Mass Zymes has plenty more protease than nearly every other digestive enzyme out there. I take it, as I say, as well, especially if there's a high-protein meal. It's really nice to kind of have in your armory. I love a good supplement, and this is one of the best. And the Zestology team has been able to arrange the lowest pricing of Mass Zymes. So you can use the custom 10% coupon code Zestology10. You can save up to 48% off select packages of Mass Zymes. That is amazing value, and this deal is only available on bioptimizers.co.uk and bioptimizers.com. Be sure to use Zestology10 for 10% off. And the best thing is, if you don't feel how Mass Zymes transforms your digestion, makes you feel better and works for you, you can get a no questions asked money back return on your order, but I don't think you will. That's it. Enjoy your Mass Zymes. Back to the show.
So in the second aspect, I mentioned that there are two aspects. So first, again, is our sense of community, and second is laughter's impact on our own mental health. So there's another quirky study. I warned you that I'm a behavioral science geek over here, but there's another study that I love where researchers developed this 8-week program that taught specific skills related to the use of humor in our everyday lives. So these were really simple things like having a more positive outlook, or developing a healthier and heartier belly laugh. Like things that are just kind of a little bit quirky and weird, and you wouldn't necessarily take them seriously. Well, every week for 8 weeks, they had a 1-hour module with these participants. And of course, they had a control study where they were, participants were taught these really small, a little bit ridiculous skills. And what they found after 8 weeks was that those in the humor skills group, relative to the control groups, reported fewer instances of depression. They reported lower stress, a higher proportion of positive to negative feelings, and even increased perceptions of control in their lives. And so it's really important to recognize, our brain is an organ. And so this is not just psychology, this is biology. When we do these small acts with our brains, we're exercising it in a way. And we know that if we exercise for 2 weeks and we go on a long hike, we're going to feel a lot better. It's going to come more naturally to us. We're not going to be breathing as heavy. Well, the same thing is true for laughter. And this is not just because of psychology. This is because of the hormones and neurotransmitters that we're feeding this organ, that we're feeding our brains. We're releasing oxytocin, we're releasing endorphins and dopamine, we're lowering our cortisol. And in that way, we are really caring for this organ, which is incredibly, obviously important to our lives and well-being.
Yeah. You mentioned that you teach a course at Stanford, and I know it's a very popular course. And I've got this image in my mind of kind of hundreds of students signing up and sitting in a big hall with their arms crossed as you walk in on the first day, kind of almost daring you to be funny. I mean, it's quite intimidating teaching a course about humor, I'm sure.
Right. Well, I would say it's intimidating both ways. So our students also walk in and are a little bit petrified. And part of this is they have this misperception that we're going to ask them to be funny. And it's absolutely not what it is. This is really about these mindset shifts that we make every single day. And so I remember we always do this humor audit before we walk into the first day so that our business school students will feel like they're, doing something serious, an audit. And which, by the way, it's the most fun audit you'll ever do. And so I highly recommend a humor audit. And essentially we ask them all these questions for them to get a sense for what's the state of laughter in your life? What's the state of the union? What's the state of humor and laughter in your life? And I remember one of my favorite responses from a student was, the question was, when was the last time you laughed? You really laughed. And his response was, on Tuesday, I did not laugh, not once. Wait for it. Who knew a class about humor could be so depressing?
Oh, brilliant.
and so it's intimidating for our students as well. Yeah. But what we find is that by the end of this 10-week course, our students are reporting having significantly more joy in their lives. And this isn't just because we made them funnier, although hopefully we did teach some techniques from comedians that move the needle there. It's more importantly that they are now finding joy in their lives and they're primed to look for it. So there's a principle in psychology called the priming effect, which quite simply says that our brains will find the things that we set out to look for. And of course, this is foundational to many forms of positive psychology, but it's applicable in humor as well, which is that if you start out your day and you say, you know what, by the end of today, I'm going to write down 3 funny things that happened today. If you start out your day that way, you will report finding far more moments of joy and laughter than if I ask you today, Tony, to tell me all of the moments that you laughed yesterday. And so when we are actively on the lookout for things, then we fundamentally lead our lives in different ways. We navigate the world on the precipice of a smile rather than a frown, and that changes everything.
Well, that's nice. And I've certainly done that in the past when I've felt a little bit disillusioned with my job, not in terms of humor, but just kind of writing down at the end of the day 3 good things that happened at work that day. And it does completely change your mindset. So I'm sure it would with humor as well.
Yeah. I love that.
Yeah.
So that's okay.
Yeah.
Thing number 2 that people can pause and do.
Okay. Yeah.
Start a list on your phone. It can be the Notes app or something else, and title it 3 funny things. And then at the end of the day, for 7 days, write down 3 funny things that happened to you that day. And today it's going to be a little bit hard. And I promise you by the end of day 7, it's going to be much, much easier.
Wow. Because some people just have a kind of humor mindset, don't they? And you kind of hang out with them and you feel better and you have a bit of a laugh and they're always cracking gags. And some people don't. I don't think I do, but it'd be nice to kind of, I think it's nice hanging out with people whose kind of whose baseline is mostly joy.
Mm-hmm. I mean, I think when you say I don't think that you do, I disagree. I think you do an incredible job. There's an innate part of humor that is curiosity, that is really just looking at the world and finding little aspects of it that are odd or interesting or incongruous. And oftentimes that's where we find humor the most. And so I humbly disagree. I think you are fantastic at finding humor and incongruity in our lives.
Extremely funny, man. I have when I went to all those comedy shows at the Edinburgh Festival years ago. I'm so interested in presentation skills, and I've been first a radio presenter and then a TV presenter for about over 20 years now. And I always dabbled with the prospect of doing some stand-up. And at Edinburgh, there was this venue called the Bear Pit, where if you lasted 10 minutes without getting heckled off, you did a very good job. And I had some mates who attempted it and didn't get through to the end of the 10 minutes. But I always thought it seemed a bit too intimidating to have a go, really. Yeah.
Oh, well, that's why I love improv comedy, because you walk up, you've got no script, and you're just like, well, the only place this can go is up, hopefully. Although I will say bad improv is really is physically uncomfortable. Every corner of your soul, bad improv is really hard. But I agree. Having stand up is a different beast.
Yeah. And what's interesting, I mean, this is a bit of a tangent, but what I find interesting is there's some people that I saw at the Edinburgh Festival 15, 20 years ago, and they were not funny. And now I will go and see them, and they are funny, and they've just learnt to be fun. There's a science to it. They've learnt how to be funny.
Yeah, there really is. I mean, you watch Netflix specials and you see the jokes that people are delivering, and you're thinking, oh my gosh, those people are so funny. And then you realize these people have delivered that same exact joke hundreds of times, and it started as a completely different joke. It's been workshopped. It's been booed off stages at dingy, basement bars with 5 audience members. It's been really, the craft has been honed over many years. And I agree. It's really interesting if you look up your favorite comedian and you try and look up really, really old clips of them. It's amazing to watch someone who was just starting out and has a very different style than now. The only exception is John Mulaney. He's exceptionally funny at all moments of his career.
Right. Okay. Well, look, I want to steal a line from your Twitter page. I think it was a retweet, but it kind of says 2020 has not been funny, but humor can get you through anything. And I mean, I think this is why I'm specifically interested in talking to you now, because times are tough, and we're recording this in September, but it'll probably go out in October, early November. Actually, when's your book out?
Ooh, out in the UK.
I think it's out in the
8th.
Oh, okay. Well, we'll try and bring it out around there then. Perfect. But, I mean, times are tough at the moment, aren't they? So, yeah. I mean, how can humor get us through what is stretching into the distance, a very long winter where there's a lot of social distancing involved indoors, and not much fun on the horizon at the moment for a lot of people.
Yeah. I think it comes back to this resilience piece that humor. We think of laughter as sort of fun and frivolous and something that comes easily during good times, and we don't necessarily think of it as a shield for ourselves in the bad times, but it really is. And so one aspect of this is, again, to go back to the brain chemistry, when we laugh, our brains lower the release of cortisol, and cortisol is our stress hormone. And by the way, epinephrine as well. So both our stress hormone and also our fight or flight hormone. And so, in fact, actually, studies have shown that even the anticipation of laughter, even if we arrive somewhere, so you arriving at that festival and thinking, okay, I'm here and I'm about to laugh.
Yeah.
Will lower your your cortisol by 39% and your epinephrine by 70%. So the impact of this is that it makes us feel safer. It makes us feel calmer. It makes us feel stressed. We're better able to make rational decisions. We're better able to be in a space to connect meaningfully with each other and have a bit more humanity with each other. I think that one of the things that's really challenging, especially right now, is so many of our interactions with our loved ones have become completely technology mediated. My parents live a 25-minute drive from me, and I've seen them twice since March. And so we're having Skype chats, and twice I went over there and we sat on their deck together 7 feet apart, and we didn't touch and we didn't hug. And it's an incredibly, incredibly hard context to be living in. And again, when we are able to find joy, which I believe is a skill, I believe that finding joy in our lives is not what happens to us. It's how we choose to view the world and how we choose to interact with it, and in turn, how it interacts back with us. When we're able to have even a small window of levity and humanity with the people that we love in that context, it bolsters our resilience. It makes our safety nets, our relationships much stronger. And it really is when we need it most.
Yeah.
There's also, by the way, this incredible longitudinal study that was done by Norwegian researchers that found that it was a 15-year longitudinal study. And they found that women and men with a strong sense of humor, they often parse these out because sometimes, so people with a strong sense of humor lived longer, in spite of illness, in spite of infection, that people who have this healthy sense of humor, it actually has an impact on our longevity as well.
Wow. Okay. I'm sold, Naomi. Yeah, I'm sold. Yeah. So listen, one of the questions I ask everyone is, what is one book that you would recommend and one tip for living with more energy and vitality? I wonder what that might be.
Oh, I've given so many already. Right. I've got 2 books depending on what you're looking for.
Okay.
If you're looking for a laugh, I really recommend Tina Fey's Bossy Pants if you haven't read it already.
Do you know, I've been recommended that before and I haven't read it. Is it good?
It's so good. It's one of those books that you're embarrassed to read in public because you're going to have a few snort laughs.
Oh, great.
And then the other one that I recommend this because it's next on my list of what to reread, is Cal Newport's Deep Work.
I have read that. That's amazing.
Yes. So I have been craving some more deep work in my life. So I'm gonna reread that one. And then I'll give a third one, which is for creative people working in a corporate environment, and that is Orbiting the Giant Hairball. And that's how to survive and thrive when you want to be doing creative and innovative work amidst, all of the corporate bureaucracy that you may find yourself in.
Oh,
okay,
yeah.
so 3.
Yeah, great. 3 good ones. I said all 3 I've made a note of, and they sound. The Cal Newport one I read ages ago, and he's actually got a new one coming out in the next month or 2. But the whole concept of deep work is something that resonates very strongly with me. And probably my favorite book is Josh Waitzkin. I don't know if you know of him, but he wrote a book called The Art of Learning.
Yes.
Yeah,
love it.
Similar kind of similar thing, isn't it? It's all about going kind of really deep in terms of anything that you do.
Yeah, I love that book. I've also gone on a deep Josh podcast dig because the way that he talks about his work as well is just incredibly compelling.
I know.
My one thing that I would recommend is that exercise that I gave, which is write down 3 funny things at the end of every day. And when I think about the impact of that, it seems so small and frivolous, but it fundamentally changes the way that we navigate our lives. And this is something growing up, I remember my mom is this incredible force of nature who just sings and dances her way through the world, leaving a trail of joy in her wake. I mean, she's like a supernatural being in this way. And one of my fondest memories from growing up was a totally unexceptional moment when I think I was 5 and my sister was 7, and we were going down the grocery aisle. And at the time, things were actually pretty hard in my family life. My dad was really sick and he's since recovered, but there were a couple years where things were really hard. And I remember we were walking down the grocery aisle, totally mundane day. And my mom just turns around and looks at us wide-eyed. And we sort of look up at her wide-eyed, like, what the hell's going to happen here? And she goes, "Girls, walk this way, please." And she starts doing this like funny little duck waddle through the grocery store aisles. And my sister and I follow her doing this funny little duck waddle through the grocery store aisles. And we're all like crying, laughing in this grocery aisle. And it, there's just this way of shifting the way that we look at our lives. And instead of, my mom, she is just someone who looks at every moment of her life and says like, "Oh, there's joy here. There can be joy here. I know there can. I'm in the grocery store aisle. Things are really, friggin' hard right now in my life. I've got my 2 kids in tow, but there's joy here. And I know I can find it or create it." So that's my little exercise that that I believe will transform people's lives and also have you have more energy and joy as well.
Oh, brilliant. Naomi, I'm going to do the exercise. I'm going to look up the 2 books that I haven't read as well. And I've got to go. Childcare. So remind me what the book is called, and it's out October the 6th, did you say, in the UK?
October the 8th in the UK. So the book is called Humour, Seriously. Co-authored with myself and my brilliant partner in crime, Dr. Jennifer Aaker, who's a behavioral scientist at Stanford. And it's available for pre-order right now at humorseriously.com. Out on October 8th.
Sensational. It's been really good to talk to you. Thank you so much.
You too. Thank you so much for having me on, Tony.
Yeah, lovely to talk to you. Speak to you again, hopefully.
Okay.
Thank you to Naomi. Thank you for listening to Zestology. Sometimes I get sent a pre-order copy of the books of the people that I interview, and I did with Naomi. I got sent a PDF, and I've enjoyed interviewing Naomi so much that I now want this in hardback form. So I've ordered it on Amazon, and it's going to be something that I consult again and again. And her book is out in the UK now. And I know she said on the podcast it was on pre-order at the end there, but it is now out because we recorded this a couple of weeks ago. It's out in the US fairly soon as well, and you can head to Amazon.com and pre-order it there. And thank you to Naomi for this podcast. Excellent to talk to her, and how lucky her students are to have her. Just before I go, have you had your lunch yet today? And is it sitting heavy in your stomach? Today's podcast is brought to you by my podcast partners, Masszymes, a full-spectrum enzyme formula with more protease than any other commercially available product. If your lunch or your dinner is sitting heavy in your stomach today, if you've eaten stuff you shouldn't have done, and especially if you've had a lot of protein, you may well want to look into Masszymes. This is a product that I definitely take. It is in my cupboard at home. I'll be having it later today. And you can get 10% off Masszymes with the code Zestology10. Head to bioptimizers.co.uk in the UK or bioptimizers.com in the US to get money off. And actually, depending on what deal you go for, I think you can get up to 48% with that code Zestology10. It contains all the other key enzymes you need for optimal digestion, as well as plenty more protease than any other product out there. So how's that lunch sitting in your stomach right now? You're probably intermittent fasting or something and feeling very smug listening to me asking that question. Anyway, you can head to bioptimizers.co.uk, bioptimizers.com, use the code Zestology10 for the strongest enzyme formula in the industry. It is Masszymes. That is it. Next week on the podcast, I've got a bit of a confession to make. I am one of life's warriors, I do worry about lots of things, including Wi-Fi signals, EMF signals and 4G signals, and what the signal coming out of our phones is doing to our heads when we hold our phone to our heads, or even when you're walking around with it in your pocket. So I've got one of the world's top experts in this issue to come on and talk about it on Zestology. You may not be walking around with your phone in your pocket afterwards, but he's got a few solutions for you as well. That's next week on Zestology. Thank you for listening and see you next time.